called foundering or founder.
Laminitis, so we're talking horses today. I thought it's been a while. So yeah, founder's a common name for a condition of the hoof called laminitis. We're seeing lots and lots of cases of this recently, and I don't know why, what's happened out there with the environmental temperatures and conditions of pasture, but we're just seeing a lot of it. Typically more prone in pony breeds and miniatures and small breeds of horse, but also I guess no equine is exempt from or immune from the condition, and overweight animals are very, very prone.
I was going to say, normally it's sort of too much clover and stuff, isn't it?
Traditionally we've almost classified most of the laminitis we see in New Zealand to pasture associated, and we've assumed that it's due to grazing pasture at certain times of the year where there's very high sugar levels in the pasture, which alters kind of gut flora or the type of bugs in the gut, which can change the vascular anatomy to the hoof and bypass the hoof as far as blood supply goes. And the end result is actually loss of the tissues that attach the hoof capsule to the pedal bone or the foot bone, and that results in an unstable foot bone and the bone sort of pushing down in the hoof capsule. It's a very, very painful condition. It's typically associated with the front feet, and we have a typical type of lameness where the animals are obviously trying to keep weight off their front legs, so they kind of lean back, if you like, and point their front legs. But the reason I wanted to bring it up is because we've seen a lot of unseasonal cases at the moment, and in recent times we've started to develop some more understanding around this disease, and perhaps I'm thinking that the majority, in fact, of these traditional pasture associated laminitis or founders probably aren't just what we used to think they were. And the biggest reason for that is the diagnosis or the understanding of a disease called equine metabolic syndrome. And what's quite interesting about this is that it's very, very analogous to type 2 diabetes in humans, and so it's caused through the effects of insulin not being able to do its job. And so we have some typical scenarios or clinical indicators of equine metabolic syndrome, one of which is recurrent laminitis, and laminitis cases that are very, very hard to control, even with a lot of work going in to try and control pasture access and things. And that's what initially got us scratching our heads about this disease, and that it wasn't quite as simple as what we thought. And we also end up with these horses and ponies getting really overweight. So currently there's a very good treatment strategy which involves exercise, diet, and in the really bad cases some medication. So if any of the watchers are thinking, well, you know, that's exactly what that old nag in the back paddocks like of mine, then perhaps it's worth talking to your veterinarian, because there's a very, very simplified way of making the diagnosis now, quite cheap and a little bit less dramatic than what we used to have to do, and very, very simple things can correct it.
It's interesting you should say about the sugar, because people that I keep coming across are saying, I used to have 2 spoonfuls of sugar in my coffee, now I have none and I'm losing weight.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess traditionally that's the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and so type 2 diabetics, like these horses, tend to be a little bit more overweight than underweight. But yeah, the laminitis associated is quite severe. And on top of, I guess, parallel to this condition is another disease of the hormones, what we call endocrine diseases, and that's a disease called equine Cushing's disease, and that's a problem derived from a gland at the base of the brain called the pituitary gland that produces an excess of a certain hormone, results in a lot of stress hormone circulating, cortisol circulating, and that's exceptionally common in older horses and ponies. In actual fact, some vets would say that any horse over the age of 30 is going to have this disease to some degree. And one of the hallmarks of Cushing's disease, on top of excessive thirst, is recurrent laminitis also. So between the two conditions, I think a lot of the more traditional causes of laminitis that we've initially worried about as being caused through pasture, I think a great proportion of them are probably tied up with one of these two diseases. And as we understand these more, there's more that can be done, and you know, we can, with advice from the veterinarian, we can probably improve the welfare and the functionability of these animals dramatically, as long as things are looked at properly.
You said that there's a test, a very simple test. Do you do that as of right, or do you do it when you're suspicious?
We would usually do it when we're suspicious, but that suspicion may be derived from, driven by the vet recurrently going out to see one of these animals with active laminitis and wondering why this is still happening when we're putting in place good pasture management and things.
Got them in a pen and eating straw.
Absolutely, or eating dirt sometimes with these little ponies. And some of the suspicion after what I've said today may be driven by the owner themselves, and it's very, very simple. Both conditions are diagnosed differently. Cushing's disease is very simple now. We've got a very new test that just involves one blood test, simple blood test sent off and checked, and that can make the diagnosis. And equine metabolic syndrome, that involves a couple of blood tests and just a little feed additive given, and then we'd make a second test a few hours later. And that's kind of, if anyone's watching has been through the checking for glucose metabolism and type 2 diabetes, I guess it's similar to what's called a glucose challenge test in people.
So that's the sugar, the amount of sugar in your blood.
It's actually measuring insulin levels and making sure that's an appropriate insulin secretion when you've got high blood sugars, so to keep the blood sugar level in the right range. And so if there's an inappropriate release of insulin, then that can be an indication of equine metabolic syndrome after we've given some glucose to the animal.
Nick, what about, you talked about the symptoms. Is there any cure? I mean, because you're talking about very, very painful feet.
Well, the big thing initially with clinical laminitis is to get rid of the inflammation, and that's usually twofold. Usually we use pain relieving drugs. We manage the foot so that it's padded, and after we've got rid of these acute symptoms, we have to be very mindful that the bone within the hoof capsule may have rotated on its axis.
Oh, charming.
Yeah, and if that happens, we need X-rays, and then we get involved with a farrier that's very proficient in corrective shoeing, and we can realign the hoof to the pedal bone once we've got the active phase of the inflammation out of the way. But some of these really bad cases are really bad, Robin. Sometimes, you know, unfortunately it does end up in euthanasia of the animal, because we can end up with horrible things, pedal bones poking through the sole of the foot, and some of the intervention methods that are needed are salvage techniques at best, and kind of not well developed or well used here, although I guess there's scope for us to get more proficient in these techniques as veterinarians. That involves releasing pus from the hoof capsule, taking hoof wall away, even the use of sterile maggots to debride and get rid of all the dead tissue within the hoof capsule. So some very good modern treatments that are just being looked at. But,
and some ancient ones.
Yeah, some ancient ones that have been reinvented, and that's true for a number of things with leech use and maggot use these days. Yeah.